we can't do this interview without asking. Mike Tyson bites off Evander Holyfield's ear, and he continues to fight. I would have thought, and I was thinking this at the time, I remember, that's the end of Tyson's career, biting a guy's ear off. But he did not get released. He continued to fight. How was that?
Well, a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Look. I mean, just think about Mike Tyson in terms of the metaphor and what that says about society, right? Here's a kid grew up in harsh circumstances in New York City, a minority kid, black kid, really no family to speak of, a wayward youth, and then he gets through kismet, he hooks up with D'Amato, this great boxing wizard. And I have some issues with some of what D'Amato did. He was a strange man. He was not all like, he could be a weird guy.
And he used the mafia to help him when he needed it, but he took them down in the press.
There you go. And then they built Tyson up to be this fantastic fighting machine, who was at one time considered to be the greatest of all time and invincible at a very young age. And then he loses it. Like you could tell when the reality started to conflict against his capabilities, right? Or his supposed capabilities. Everybody thought he was invincible, and then all of a sudden he's not. And Evander Holyfield has given it to him, right? When everybody thought he would knock out Holyfield so easily in 1 or 2 rounds, he had that's a psychological meltdown. So I'm going to bite somebody in the
Absolutely.
ear. So I think people recognize that, right? All of a sudden, the mythology of Mike Tyson was exposed. He's a human being, just like everybody else. They say that great men die twice, right? They die once in that's Tyson's death to me. That's his first death. His second death will be later on when he expires, like all of us will. But that to me is like the death of Mike Tyson, the first one, when he bites the ear, because what he's basically saying is, I don't have it anymore. I've lost it mentally, and I'm going to do something really stupid. Now he gave the excuse that Holyfield was headbutting him, and Holyfield was not unlike any other fighter. To get into position inside, you got to move your head, and sometimes heads collide. Just because it's happening to you, Mike, doesn't mean it's all of a sudden some egregious a foul, because Mike did that many times himself. It's just that he got beat at that game, right? And he couldn't handle it mentally. And so he goes and he bites. He bit the ear because he wanted to quit. He didn't want to. He didn't want to be embarrassed, right?
Right. And he didn't want to be knocked out 2 fights in a row.
Oh.
The reason he did it, Mitch, it's out of fear of losing.
Sure.
Sure, Holyfield butted him, but Mike was more upset that the referee didn't do anything. But that's not true. Mills Lane called time and said, that's a headbutt. That's your first warning. He gave him an official warning. Stop leading with your head. But Mike's still throwing forearms, and Mike was a bully. And when the skill is equal, the guy who wins is the one who can impose his will on the other man. And Mike couldn't impose his will on Holyfield. Holyfield kept beating him, and Mike just thought, I'm not going to get knocked out again. This isn't going to happen to me. And so he bit him, and then he got a chance to bite him again. And it's pure fear of losing. Yeah. That's what it was. He came up against a superior force, and there was nothing he could do. When I wrote about it at the time, I said, Holyfield's just lucky that Tyson wasn't shorter. Otherwise, it could have been much worse.
So Tyson bites his ear off, and at some point, I think it was after that, I'm sorry, he goes to jail for 3 years, but he's still fighting, and he's still the champ.
Right. He went to jail before that.
It was before?
Yeah, because he was supposed to fight Holyfield years before. He gets out of jail, he fights Holyfield, but Tyson is big money. And so people come to see him. They want to see if he's going to explode like that in the ring and do something crazy. And so they'll pay money to see him.
The mythology machine around fighters can be really ramped up, right? When it can really, and that even happened here in Toronto with a young fighter called Sean O'Sullivan. The mythology machine ramped up around him way beyond his capabilities. And I always thought Sean was a talented kid, but people had expectations of him.
Right.
They were just,
example.
There's no way he could have lived up to those expectations. People
No.
wanted him to succeed, so they wanted him to succeed so badly. Nice East End, East Side kid. Dad was a TTC driver. Went to the Olympics. Could quote Shakespeare. Right, he was the package that everybody wanted to be the face of boxing in Toronto. The problem was he couldn't live up to that. He was not. He was
didn't
not
have the skill set for a pro fighter. He had no defense, and he went to Florida to audition for Angelo Dundee. And after 2 weeks, Angelo said, "You're a great amateur, but I wouldn't turn pro because you don't have defense, and you're too old to learn it. You'll get hurt." And so Sugar Ray Leonard and his lawyer, Mike Trainer, who I detest, signed him and managed him. Right. And then he fought Simon Brown, who was the uncrowned welterweight champ. And Brown just ended him. He almost killed him.
Yeah. The fight I always remember about Sean was when he fought Donovan Boucher, a young guy who grew up on the same street my grandfather and dad lived on when my dad was a kid, right? Donovan. It's funny, they had two Canadian champs on Gillespie Avenue in the West End of Toronto. Anyway, and Donovan recalls my grandfather, who was a stern man. They used to come up and try to grab my grandfather's or pretend to grab my grandfather's wallet because he had like a chain and a wallet in his body. And my grandfather put a nail in the end of the cane and was poking at those guys. So sorry, that's an aside.
Yeah, but your grandfather, he was a tough guy.
Oh, he was a different man.
I know you've told me stories about him. Guys, I wanna throw out a quote.
Can I just tell you very quickly? Sean O'Sullivan gets knocked out by Donovan Boucher at Varsity Arena. And I looked at his mom, and his mom had collapsed. And Sean's older brother and sister were carrying her under the arms out of the arena, right? So if you ever really want to see the effects of boxing, if you really want to see
brutal knockout,
watch the mother of the fighter that loses.
Do they go to the fights? The
yes,
yeah, some of them do. There's a great Telescope documentary on my father. It's available on YouTube called George Chuvalo Hits the Big Time. It was on Telescope. It was an award-winning documentary in 1965, and my grandmother is listening to the radio to my dad's fight with Patterson in New York, and you could see the worry on her, and she was like overwhelmed, and she couldn't be in front of the camera. And she walks into the hallway, and they pan to a long shot of my grandmother in deep concern, right? Like the boxing it's a harsh reality. Sorry to stop you there. I just wanted to get that in. But
no, your stories are wonderful. I could go on for hours with you guys. I want to throw out a quote to each one of you, one at a time, and I want you to comment on the quote or the man, but just in a couple of lines. Floyd Mayweather Jr. said, "I'll let the punches do the talking." Lou.
Yeah, I think Floyd Mayweather is an all-time great, but I agree with Mike Tyson. If he thinks he's better than Ali was, he's delusional. But Floyd, I met him several times. I was with Angelo, which is how I met him. But he wasn't overtly friendly, but he was different than he was when he was in the ring. That was sort of a thing he projected. He made phenomenal money, and he understood that Ali said 100% came to see Ali, but 99% came to see Ali get beat. Floyd didn't care whether you came to see him get beat. And every time he'd win, they'd say, well, you haven't fought Marcos Maidana, so he beats Maidana. You haven't fought Castillo, so he beats Castillo. You haven't fought Manny Pacquiao, so he fought Manny Pacquiao. Though Pacquiao fought that fight with a torn shoulder muscle. But he still beat everyone who was there, and he beat Canelo. So he did everything that was asked of him. I sort of am leery of his record of 50-0 because the 50th win was against Conor McGregor, who's not a professional boxer. So, he's a UFC guy. But yeah, he said, and I agree with his comment, my to do the talking. Whether you like me or don't like me doesn't matter. Look at my record. I never lost as a pro.
Mitch Chuvalo, Marvin Hagler said, "I'm not the greatest, but I'm the best." What did he mean by that?
Well, I think imposition of his will on people, right? He might not have been the most technically proficient, but when it ever went to deep waters late in a fight, his conditioning and his desire and his ability to impose his will on fighters take away the last Sugar Ray Leonard fight because that was a questionable decision, and he was a little old, and he suffered a lot from the fact that when he fought Leonard, people were watching what Leonard was doing as opposed to what Hagler was doing. And when you focus on one athlete as opposed to the interaction between the two of them, it can skew your interpretation of a fight. But yeah, definitely like the imposition of will and his mental preparation, the hat with war on it. Like he was ready he was ready to die in the ring, unfortunately and unfortunately.
Yeah, and you have to understand with Leonard, people were just amazed that Leonard was still there. People thought this isn't going to go 2 rounds. And they were saying to him, don't kill him. And Angelo Dundee won the fight because before the Petronelli brothers were nice guys, but they weren't the best boxing managers. And so he said, first of all, Ray doesn't want a 15-round fight. You have to make it 12 rounds. And his management, the Petronelli, said, sure, Marvin's going to knock him out in 1 round anyways. And we don't want a big ring, we want or small ring. We want the biggest ring possible. And they said, we'll give you a 100-foot ring. It's going to make no difference. And all Hagler wanted was an entrance. Like, I entered the ring first. I get this corner. Hagler would have retained his title, but for an error. He nixed the British judge because when he beat Alaminter for the title, all the British fans at Wembley Stadium threw bottles at him. So he took it out on all Brits. And so he said, I don't want Terry Gibbs as the judge. So what happens is they have another judge, Jojo Garcia from Mexico, who scores the fight something like, I think it was like 10 rounds to 2 for Leonard. But they still had Gibbs in the studio scoring on his own. And he said, I gave the fight to Hagler, 7 rounds to 5. So if he hadn't kicked out the original British judge, he would have won.
Interesting.
So it's frustrating.
Lou, I know that you posted some stuff about Israel post October 7th on your website. I just want to go that Jewish route for a second. Have there been great Israeli or Jewish fighters in history?
Oh yeah, man! Holy smokes! Have there ever been
Israeli?
I don't know about Israeli, but certainly Jewish.
There's an Israeli heavyweight. His name I can't remember, but Jewry Foreman, who was a junior welterweight, moved from Russia to Israel and to here and to the States. Same with Dimitri Salita. But as Mitch knows, from the 1890s to the 1940s, the majority of fighters were Jewish.
Right.
And
the Benny Leonard, Barney Ross.
Oh yeah,
so many guys.
Barney Ross.
Even on the Toronto scene, Davey Yak, right?
Yeah.
Sammy Lovespring, a guy I absolutely loved. He wasn't much of an accomplished fighter, but he was one of the most interesting men to ever talk to. A guy called Julie Mandel, who actually went the distance with Clyde Gray. He was just like, my father said he admired him more than any other fighter. I said, why, Dad? I said, because he can't punch worth a damn. He's got a pea shooter, and he's going to a gunfight with a pea shooter, and he's still got the guts to do it.
There's another Canadian,
a great guy. I love talking to him.
Davey Abad was another guy, a Jewish Canadian fighter, and there were some real good ones. But in the States, you had Solly Seaman, who was the world featherweight champion, and he was the one who showed James Braddock how to beat Max Baer. Baer, by the way, was not Jewish. And Ray Arcel told me I showered with him after a workout. I can verify that he's not Jewish.
What about that great story, Lou, of Chomsky? He beats Jack Johnson, the soon-to-be future heavyweight. They both go to jail together because there should not have been it was an unsanctioned fight. I think it was in Galveston, Texas.
Right.
And then Chomsky shows him all the secrets of defense that he's picked up over the years that he used against them. And then Johnson uses that, things like putting the crux of your hand in a person's elbow to prevent them from punching, things of that nature. And they let him out of jail a couple of days later, and Jack Johnson had absorbed like a sponge all that boxing history.
Well, they were together for a month. They would box during the day.
Joinski. Is it Joinski?
Kowinski.
Thank you.
And so Joe Kowinski, who he was only 5'11", 178 pounds. He broke Jim Jeffries, the Boilermaker. He was like a sequoia tree. broke his jaw. I fought him to a draw. And when he fought Johnson, what he did was he tricked Johnson. Johnson was jabbing, and so what he did was Kowinski held his hands up higher to expose the stomach. So when Johnson leaned forward, Kowinski came forward for left hook on the temple and knocked him out. And Johnson said, "How'd you do that?" And as Mitch just said, for the next couple of months, he taught him. Yeah. He said, "This is what you do. If a guy's got you against the ropes, you hook your right arm into his right arm, spin off the ropes, and then at the same time, spin him into the ropes." And he said, if you want to trap him on the ropes, put your lead leg between his legs. He can't move either way. You've taken his balance off. He showed him how to do the shoulder roll. But he said, a guy as big as you, 6'2", 220 pounds, should never be getting hit. You shouldn't be going in. You should be moving back. You should use your reach and whack them when they come into you. Let them knock themselves out. And that changed. And of course, as Mitch said, Jack Johnson just took off then. A couple years after that.
Well, why so many Jews in the fighting business?
It's the same reason why there were a lot of blacks.
Latinos, blacks. It's the sport of the underclass, right? They came to North America. Yeah. They were low on the socioeconomic totem pole. It's a way to climb quickly. Unfortunately, when they climb and then they usually drop back down after they lose everything. But it just Max Baer, like you can talk. There's so many, right? So many.
Yeah, and the reason was they. It's my wife in the background yelling at me.
don't get so animated, Lou.
Yeah.
So what happened is other avenues were closed off to the Jewish fighters. There were quotas on medicine and law and dentistry for everyone. So you would have Jewish fighters or black fighters who, a lot of them were smart, but they just weren't going to get into school. Same with black jazz musicians. They weren't going to be allowed to be taught. So they had other older ones teach them. And so these were avenues. They were only meant to be one-offs. And so you had, phenomenal Jewish fighters, as Mitch mentioned.
Enlighten me, Lou. Was Harry Greb Jewish?
No, Harry Greb wasn't Jewish.
Okay.
He's German.
That's right. Okay.
But you had guys. Benny Yanger was one of the guys.
We mentioned Ray Arcel earlier. Ray Arcel said the greatest fighter I ever saw was Benny Leonard. He said and he'd seen them, and he trained Duran. And when you say you've trained Duran, and you say a fighter couldn't touch Benny Leonard, he said Duran could not touch Benny Leonard.
Well, what happens to you guys as you get older? Are you official boxer historians, or are there a ton of you guys out there? Because it's phenomenal to me how much you know.
I'm sorry, I missed it. My wife interrupted me.
Yeah. No, I think that boxing is that the sense of history in boxing. To understand boxing, you have to understand its history, right? Which means, as you talked about earlier, Avrum, there's been so much great literature written about it. You read the literature, you read the canon, right? There's so and Lou is a great historian. There's like we mentioned, A.J. Liebling. I've read Gay Talese. Who's the modernist guy now? Springs Toledo. They talk about all the time.
He's very good.
Yeah, the guy who wrote the book on Al Bummy Davis and the mob.
Ron Ross passed away.
Yeah. There's so much great literature out there, and boxing was one of the three major sports in North America because it translated so well to radio, along with baseball and horse racing. People don't realize horse racing was huge in the early 20th century because it was a great, the medium of radio. You could describe it as you could a fight, as you could a baseball game. So, and then it would translate to the, one guy I want to give credit to on the Toronto scene who did not get a lot of credit as being a great boxing writer. And there weren't very many great paper boxing writing scribes in Toronto, but one of them was Jerry Gladman.
Yeah.
And Jerry was an excellent writer. I always remember one of the greatest fights I ever saw, a middleweight fight between Aldo Corelli and Ronnie Edwards. It was such a Toronto fight in 1969, 1970. And I'll always remember the line that Jerry Gladman wrote in the Toronto Sun. He said, for 10 rounds last night, Ronnie Edwards and Aldo Corelli tried to kill each other, and Ronnie Edwards came closest in succeeding in doing